chug, 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 chug,
Hello and welcome back to the Wizard Staff. I'm your host Guy.
And I'm Blake.
And we are two drunk novices who like to talk about EDH. We drink and swear, so you've been warned. Please drink responsibly when you are talking about children's card games. Tonight, we ask the question, does white suck in EDH? White's often known to have probably the least amount of card draw, card advantage when it comes to white. A lot of people are complaining about how there's no good white commanders or as strong as some of the other colors because you can have a lot of mono blue, green, black. Those can kind of like hold themselves just by themselves. Red has often or has been getting a lot more support in the recent years where it has now been able to like kind of hold itself in commander a little bit better, but white still seems to be lacking in that kind of support that WotC is just, I don't know if it's intentionally or they just don't know what white needs necessarily, or like how to give the support that they need to white.
And that's the end of the episode, folks. Tune in next time.
Yeah, tune in next time to listen to us talk about, is Brawl good for Commander? Sneak peek. Anyway, before we get into the topic, it should be no surprise by the title of this episode that we are drinking white wine.
Mm-hmm.
Blake,
every time.
Well, not every time. Shut up. What brand are you drinking?
So I picked up something called the Dreaming Tree Sauvignon Blanc, and it's like a white wine, and the bottle's empty already. Like the last quarter of it's like in my cup right now, so I'm feeling great and ready to roll.
I picked up a wine called Foxy. It's a sparkling white wine. I think it's partially pear flavored. That's what these slices of, I'm not quite sure, but it's a sparkling white wine. One can is $5 at Whole Foods, which is kind of a fucking ripoff, but it was the only one that was cold at the time.
You got the last one, right?
I got the last one that was cold, and then, I finished it off before we started talking, so I had to go back down and buy another one. And this one's like Luke cold. Like it's not warm, but it's not like cold. So it would be better if I had ice, but at this point I do not. So that's unfortunate.
Modern day tragedy. Mm-hmm. That's what that is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's been a while. I was talking to you about this, but it's been a while since I've drinking white wine. That was like all I drunk for the first like 8 or 9 episodes. I would just be like, white wine. And then I was like, oh no, I'm just drinking Guinness. And then got into this.
That's so painfully accurate.
This is painfully accurate. Shut up. Why do I have you? You're just gonna like make fun of me. I can do this episode by myself.
Good luck.
You don't play mono white. I do. You don't know the struggle, and
you don't know my pain.
You don't. Yeah. So shut up. God.
Okay. All right. Should I talk about the philosophy of white, real fast?
As we get into this episode, What is white about, Blake?
So if you've been living under a rock, white wants peace. White looks around and sees a world of suffering, like a guy who can't put ice in his wine. There are so many. This is the end of the podcast. No. There are so many individuals that struggle day to day, but the world has the resources to address this suffering. There is enough for everyone to have what they need, as opposed to what they want. Suffering is a byproduct of individuals not prioritizing the good of the group. Quote, Mark Rosewater.
Okay, so the conversation begins with a little card called Happily Ever After, which just came out in the recent set Throne of Eldraine. So Happily Ever After is an enchantment that costs 3 and a white. When Happily Ever After enters the battlefield, each player gains 5 life and draws a card. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 5 colors among permanents you control, There are 6 or more card types among permanents you control and or cards in your graveyard, and your life total is greater than or equal to your starting life total, you win the game. So prior to Throne of Eldraine being announced, Mark Rosewater teased that White was going to get something that it's never gotten before, and it's going to help out the Commander community. And what he was referring to is Happily Ever After, and the ability for each player to draw a card, which is a very White thing to do. White is about to go to the group. It's kind of like the community. There was a little backlash between this because people didn't really see this as something that helps out White, or at least this card doesn't help out White, because you play this card and all your opponents draw a card. So you, in the terms of cards in your hand, remain neutral because you play a card, draw a card, but all your opponents draw one extra card, and so now they each have some new card that could either be a response, it could be something that they need to help win them the game. I don't know. It could a lot of different opportunities. Also about this is, the fact that the win the game clause does not apply to mono white, because you need to have a card of every color. Now you could get really really into it by referencing some of those cards that are quote unquote every color. I think there's 2 that you could run in mono white, but in order to then we talked about this in our Throne of Eldraine episode, but if you really wanted to play this card in mono white, you're not going to be able to win off of that clause. It was kind of like hey, mono white's going to get something, but this thing sucks.
Yeah, it really does. It's basically like a group hug effect, and I don't know, a lot of people who are more competitive minded realize group hug is not really a very good strategy. So this card came out, and then many people began saying White needs card draw to be good, which in my opinion isn't quite the right question to ask. People should be asking, does White need help with card advantage? And that's a much more broad but important concept to understand in any resource-based card game. So card draw versus card advantage are a little bit different. Card draw is strictly the cards that are in your hand, whereas card advantage is the cards in your hand, on your field, arguably in your graveyard if your deck is tuned to take advantage of them. Any card, any resource that's in a zone that you can reasonably take advantage of is considered card advantage. On that idea, if White got a direct card draw spell, imagine a divination, which is a blue card draw spell that says draw 2 cards or something, but in White, that would probably screw up other formats. White is known for its really efficient removal spells, and giving direct draw to the color would probably unbalance it in other formats, which I just want to go on a small quick tangent. WotC is actually very, as much as people like to complain about WotC, and there's lots of valid things to complain about WotC is actually very good at balancing cards across multiple formats, whereas Konami can't even get Yu-Gi-Oh's one format right, tier 0 format after tier 0 format, and they had to invent the link mechanic to nerf literally the entire game. But that's beside the point. I'm gonna stop talking. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, White tends to have very symmetrical effects, which is great for EDH since that means it's, affecting the whole board. But the downside being that some of these effects aren't great for the social construct, which, White's has MLD, board wipes, etc. So if you want to introduce a card like Divination into White, it would have to be along the lines of what Happily Ever After did, which is each player draws 2 cards. But again, that's not really, helping you out as much as it's helping out your opponents. Mm-hmm. Moving forward, I would also like to say that we were going to have a very special guest on our episode. One of my good friends, Jesse. He is my brother when it comes to playing mono white. He and I both know the struggles. He loves Nahiri, the Lithomancer. That's like his bae. As to like how I have Avacyn, Angel of Hope, who is my bae. We both love playing mono white. I feel like Jesse understands mono white a lot better than I do in the terms of how he can consistently be able to like get the answers or have very fine-tuned and focused decks. And we were supposed to have him on, but unfortunately due to just scheduling conflictions, he was not able to join us. But he did write a lot of notes for this episode. At times I'll make sure to like reference what he has to say, because a lot of what he has to say is a very good point and valid. Yes, just moving forward, as I realize we're going to be referencing his notes quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, that's
I want to give credit where credit's due.
Yeah, and that's like, yeah, he's with us in spirit, like a 1/1 white creature spirit token with flying. But that's a good point that you bring up. You have a mono white deck and have actually like experienced playing a mono white deck, whereas I have to be honest, I have not. I have never built a mono white commander, so everything I'm gonna say you have to kind of take with a grain of salt. I mean, you should anyway, but I'm just saying. Yes.
Well, you have told me, but you've built a Balan Wandering Knight deck, but you just haven't like put the physical cards together because Balan doesn't come in foil.
Yeah, I'm like a fickle bitch. I'm like, the commander doesn't come in foil, I'm literally not building it, even though I spent like multiple hours like building the deck, like so many hours. I mean, I'm just like, it's not in foil, I'm not building it. I'm so terrible.
So you kind of know, I'm sure that I would love to hear some of when it comes up. Definitely talk about your experience of some of the struggles that you had during that time. Yeah, Jesse and I each have had like multiple games. Like some nights that's all we're just playing is our mono white decks. And we definitely kind of get into the typical problems of card draw. Well, me more than him, because the way that he builds his decks, he definitely builds it to the advantage of what white's good at, which is, equipment card draw and doing more of the quote-unquote mean effects in EDH.
Should we start talking about those?
Backtracking just a little bit and how you were like shit-talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! I do think that there is a way that, so kind of talking how you said white can't get a card like Divination because that would just screw up other formats. Not only do I think that would just screw up other formats, but it does break the color pie.
Yeah.
Really, like, it would just kind of like take it and like twist it in half. Mark Rosewater has often talked about how each color has to have a weakness. Otherwise, you would just play one color all the time. And to me, it is probably white's biggest problem is the card draw. Now, moving in forward, card draw versus the card advantage is what we're kind of like considering. And does the card draw really matter if you can create good card advantage with white? That's kind of what we're asking. If you were to introduce card draw into white, I do think it would be somewhat to the capacity of what Happily Ever After does, and very much of like everyone does it. I think a cool card could have been like, what is it? Oh god, it's the green card where everyone gets a land, and then if everyone gets the land, you get another one in addition to that, where it has like the tempting offer effect. I think white could get things like that where it's like, hey, everyone can do this, but then also playing on to the effect of white being very taxing, it would then say, so whoever also drew a card, I'll draw an additional card for the card that they drew. Just kind of like my thoughts.
I mean, I will say that white is really good at relatively good at recursion, like bringing stuff back from like the graveyard, which is how the color tries to regenerate card advantage.
Yes. And I think a big problem when people is people don't think of that kind of like solution of how they can get back stuff. It's not, oh shoot, all my stuff's gone, I have to play a bunch of new stuff. White has the ability to, yes, get cards back, card recursion. And so instead of saying, how can I get new stuff, a much easier and more probable solution would be, how can I get the stuff I just lost back? Because you were probably going to have more answers than saying like, oh, now I got to play a bunch of stuff.
Because like the most obvious example is Sun Titan, right? Like everyone knows what Sun Titan does.
I just bought a Sun Titan, by the way.
Yeah, but I also want to say like, okay, like White's really good at recurring things, so that's how it generates card advantage. I also want to say, like, instead of trying to speed up to other colors, I would argue White wants to slow down the opponents to their level. So you want to play cards kind of like Alms Collector and even Mind Sensor to like slow down opponents to your level, to your speed. And I understand that some people are shouting into the mic like other colors do it better. Like I get it, but that's kind of how White operates. But Mono White also has cards that I'm going to say it. I'm going to say the S word. Stacks. The forbidden word.
Yes, Stony Silence, Defining Silence, Silence, Rule of Law. Mm-hmm. Really good cards for slowing down your opponents. In a way of like anti-ramp, since White doesn't have nearly as many ways of like digging through decks or getting lands into play.
Yeah, like I feel like I've corrupted you, guy, because like you said you bought Deafening Silence to put into your Avacyn deck, right?
Yeah, I kind of want to see what those stacks effects might have. I want people... I feel bad in the sense of like, yeah, it'll slow down the game, but I need people to like play at the speed that how White can play.
Yeah, but like in the example of Avacyn, like your commander costs like what, 8 fucking mana? That's a fucking lot for a commander, right? So it's like you need to play things like Deafening Silence and like Rule of Law, where it's like players can only play one spell a turn, like slow everyone down to your level, so like you can even hope to casting your commander, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's like, I don't know, it's like people hate on stacks, but it's very much a necessary archetype, especially like stopping combo and fast decks. It's like people complain about combo and fast decks, and it's like, all right, my answer is stacks, and then people complain about stacks, and it's like there's no pleasing you people. People just like to complain. I don't know. That's been my experience. Anyway, so
something
yeah.
That I kind of forgot to mention was, as I was trying to go through, card draw in White, there are 119 cards in White that can like specifically just draw a card, one card, singular, and a majority of those are like cantrips that destroy some type of permanent or can cycle, which makes me wonder why like some people aren't using more of these, or like they're cheap CMC cards that deal with threats that then draw you a card, so you become card neutral. Some are a little restrictive in the sense of like, oh, they only destroy an enchantment or they only destroy an artifact, which by the way, White can deal with a majority of like different permanent types. It's one of the, I think it's the only color that can like do that, but that's a way that it can like either get card advantage or create card neutrality. So I want to interject with one of Jesse's comments, the first one. The problem with these kind of cantrips is that they have a tendency of just going neutral. White should have a really expensive enchantment. They can get them continuous value. Just name it like Resupply and have it draw you a card once a turn if you gained life that turn. Or if you have to look at the top 5 of your upkeep and get an equipment. Just make the mana costs too high and the effect too slow for standard, and you'll be fine. What do you think about that, Blake?
Yeah, so that sort of reminds me how, like, a lot of these draw a card stapled onto, like, a really, like, mediocre pump spell instant or whatever, like, weren't really relevant, and then how Feather the Redeemed, the fairly new Boros commander, came along and suddenly made all of these cards viable. And because Feather returns those cards to your hand at the beginning of your end step or whatever, like, you maintain that card advantage. You never actually lose those cantrip effects, so you could actually build up your hands while retaining all of these effects. You know what I mean? So, in mono white, they aren't really that helpful, but, like, once you start branching into other colors, they kind of start to matter more, specifically, like, within Feather.
Yeah, Jesse built a Feather deck, and it was very good.
Yeah.
But then you have to consider, you had to bring red into this in order for it to become super good, because Feather is a Boros commander.
Yeah.
And I kind of see what he means by the fact that, you know, you're going neutral. Like, you're not creating any more board presence. You're just kind of, like, getting people to be more at your level. And you're just drawing one card, replacing the card that you just lost. But, I don't know. I feel like some of them are underplayed because, like, you have cards like Return to Dust, where you destroy a artifact or enchantment, and you do have the option of destroying another one if you play it during your turn. But cards like the new True Love's Kiss, which came in Throne of Eldraine, which does the exact same thing, only destroying one, but then it draws you a card. I feel like, not to necessarily say, oh, replace one with the other, but it's a good card that you could slot in the deck and kind of, like, give you a small boost. Because I don't think you need to have a ton of cards that draw you in white. But if you just have some of these cantrips, like, that can, like, go through your deck to, like, get you those cards that can create those recursion or board presence, that's going to help you out a lot.
So I kind of want to move on to kind of like white's card advantage, which I've kind of compiled into like 5 different categories, and I want you to kind of at the end of it tell me like what you think, because the way I see it, there's like 5 categories to mono white's card advantage, which is protection. Cards like Mother of Runes, Giver of Runes, Teferi's Protection, that force your opponents to waste their spot removal and mass removal. Then there's Pillow Fort cards, which, especially in like more mid to low power level metas, like can slow the game down to where you live long enough to do important things like Sphere of Safety, Ghostly Prison, Windborn Muse, Norn's Annex, Blazing Archon. And then mono white can do creature tokens. Yes, I understand you can do creature tokens better if you add like another color, especially like green, but you can still do it in mono white, like Anointed Procession, God Eternal Oketra, Cathar's Crusade, Divine Visitation, Martial Coup. And then there's arguably like the best category, which is removal, like Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile and Return to Dust, which you mentioned previously, and a ton of other mono white board wipes. There's so many mono white board wipes for creatures. And then like there's the mass land destruction effects like Armageddon. And then the last category is like taxing effects, like Smothering Tithe is like pretty much the best example of this category, like things that make your opponents pay more, otherwise you get an advantage.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think you categorize them pretty well. I do want to say, at least for maybe 4 out of 5 of these categories, Jesse had this really interesting concept, or maybe it's just like it's a pretty obvious concept that not a lot of people like think about, but like the way to really play mono white is to be like mean, and that seems counterintuitive to what white's philosophy is, and it's like I want to be for the good of the group. But you have cards like Armageddon that destroy all lands, and those are like super helpful because it brings everyone to the same level. You have these taxing cards for the Pillow Fort, Sphere of Safety, Ghostly Prison that either just really annoy your opponents into not attacking you, or Mother of Runes, Giver of Runes, the Fury's Protection, that kind of just, can create answers to things like on the spot. And Jesse just brought up the point that like if you want to play white really well, you just have to like kind of bite the bullet and really harvest on these strategies that are kind of like breaking the social construct of EDH, which now that I think about it is kind of shitty, because people will be like, mass land destruction, shut up.
Well, okay, let me ask you that, because like you play Avacyn, and like almost like the whole point of your deck is, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like put out Avacyn, and as soon as possible play a board wipe the next turn, either destroying their lands or creatures or artifacts or enchantments or whatever. And like all of your stuff stays, and that's how you create the imbalance where you suddenly come out ahead late game, right?
That's the idea, but it doesn't often work because Avacyn costs so much mana.
Yeah.
So yeah, when I can pull it off, it feels great because that's what I want to do. But I don't know. It's just, why should I feel bad about destroying a ton of land when you are playing green and have 30 lands by turn 4? How is that fair? How is that fair? Tell me, Blake, how is that fair? It's not.
Yeah, like,
Sorry,
I agree with you. It's just like you're balancing out, you're playing to white's strengths. And white's strengths include like mass land destruction, and like I think that's fine. Like I think people need to understand like mana dorks and artifact ramp can like supply you with mana while you rebuild your land count, and like people can survive after like mass land destruction, but like the more casual you get, the like more so they rely on lands, and so they're mad at you. But like as you get more and more like mid-tier or even like high tier, it's like, oh, like you like mass land destruction spell, I don't care, I win anyways, like either turns before or like I'm gonna win anyways with artifacts or mana dorks. So
yeah, I mean, I get that if I were to play mass land destruction and don't have kind of like a clear win con.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. I think that's the problem most people have, where it's like you board wipe and it's like, all right, can you guarantee us like over the next like 4 or 5 turns that you're gonna like beat us down and win? Like that's what people want. People don't want to be like, well, maybe I can climb back from this and then have to like struggle through like 5 to 10 turns and maybe win. People want to like know like, all right, you wiped our board, all right, you got this board that's way better than ours and you're going to defeat us, all right, concede. I think part of that issue is the like stigma a lot of EDH players have about conceding, which is like almost an entire topic of its own.
Right, like how's that kind of worse than when someone plays Cyclonic Rift, bounces everyone's things back, and then they're like, okay, are you gonna win? And then the person's like, nah. Like, how's that worse? Or like, how's that better? It's kind of the same. If you don't have the immediate response, or like you can like guarantee that, I see maybe why people are annoyed by that, but like this is like white's only answers, like trying to like catch up. It's like make everything equal, and you have to play to like the color strengths. So
yeah, I feel you. So I want to move on.
No, because you don't play mono white. You don't feel me.
I don't. Yeah. I don't know. Do you want to like wallow for like a minute?
Well, I mean, this ironically, Avacyn, the deck Avacyn, this is just kind of ironic. The deck Avacyn isn't like, I think, in the spirit of white, whereas white's about the community and about creating, you know, this neutrality, where Avacyn's just gonna come out on top. If you board wipe, do whatever, like all the stuff on Avacyn's side of the field is going to stay, and you're not really caring. So in a way, the Avacyn deck is kind of like black in philosophy, where it's like I'm doing whatever I can to stay out on top, which is kind of what you need to do in just mono white in general. It's like
guy.
What?
All you have to do is run Swords to Plowshare or Path to Exile to get rid of Avacyn, which is mono white.
Ah, shit, you're right. It is.
Yeah.
Creature.
I knew it. I was gonna feel really stupid if like I got it wrong with the whole.
Well, I mean, I feel really
staple.
stupid because I'm the one who plays mono white.
Good. As long as I'm not the one who looks stupid.
Well, you look stupid in other ways. So.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah, anything to lower your self-esteem. It doesn't need to be as high as it is. I feel like we've gotten off on some tangents.
We have.
Or I have just because like I'm super bitter about mono white.
Can we talk about mono white card advantage?
Isn't that what we just talked about?
I mean, I have a whole like section dedicated to it.
Do you mean mono white card advantage or mono white card draw?
Card draw. Sorry.
That's what I thought. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So now we're even.
Hold on. Back up. Wrap up. Kind of like summarize what we just talked about. So, yes, Jesse, my friend, brought the fact that like if you really want to play mono white, you have to play to mono white's strengths, which is mass land destruction or like these stacks effects, which are quote unquote mean, kind of break the social construct of EDH. But those are like your only options. So you really, oh god, why? Alcohol just makes me burp. So if you really want to like get ahead in white, those are kind of your only options, which sucks. But at the same time, if you build your deck right, I feel like it's not going to be too big of a problem. So that just tells me that I haven't built my deck well enough, because it does become a problem.
Get good. So now we're gonna talk about mono white card draw. So it's like a lot of people talk about like how mono white has no card draw, and like it totally makes sense because like at first glance like the color really sucks at it. Like there's pretty much like pay mana to draw a card like Dawn of Hope and Mentor the Meek. Then there's spells that cantrip like Defiant Strike and Shelter, and then
True Love's Kiss.
Yes, that too. That just came out. And then there's cycling cards. Cycling is weird, like Cast Out and Forsake the Worldly. Then there's creatures with draw triggers for equipment, auras, or enchantments, like Pure Steel Paladin, SRAM, Core Spirit Dancer, Mesa Enchantress, which are arguably the best card draw effects next to Dawn of Hope and Mentor the Meek, because they're repeatable. And then there's spells with Investigate, like Thraben Inspector and Humble the Brute. And then we get to Hate Bears, like Spirit of the Labyrinth and Alms Collector, cards that we talked about earlier that slow down other colors to your level.
Wait, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Because when I saw this and you said Hate Bears, I was like, oh, so they must be 2/2s that cost 2. And that's not the case. So are you just calling them Hate Bears because they're like hate cards? Or did you think that they were bears?
Yeah, so like, yeah, they're not 2/2s for 2, but like the idea is kind of like the whole idea is like they're a low CMC creature with like relatively speaking low power and toughness with like a effect that hates on your opponents. So yeah, they're not like strictly hate bears, but they're basically hate bears. They're the idea of hate bears. Are you happy?
No, because I'm playing mono white.
Fuck you. All right.
Fuck you. You're not playing mono white.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm not, and I don't regret
You don't
it.
know my struggle.
You don't know my pain. Okay. I also want to give like some more context to like everyone listening. Like the top 10 mono white commanders are SRAM, Senior Idificer, Avacyn, Angel of Hope, Audric, Luminok, Marshall, Darian, King of Kajeldor, Kemba, Ka Regent, Nahiri, the Lithomancer, Balin, Wandering Knight, Tishar, Ancestor's Apostle, 8.5 Tails, and God Eternal Oketra. Guy, what do you think of these like top 10 EDH rec commanders?
We'll get into kind of like how they each kind of create their own card advantage. I think the direct problem is they need to have like at least some of them need or if you want to have a good mono white commander, you need to make sure that it's creating some kind of card advantage, and I think maybe half of them do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely why SRAM is the most popular, because he like literally says like in his text like draw cards for playing like 0 CMC equipment, right?
I would also say that maybe part of the reason why some of these are so popular is just because people have a thing for, you know, the lore. And so, Avacyn's really popular because she's a really great character. And she does create great card advantage because she makes everything indestructible, but she costs 8 CMC and is a white card.
But the thing about the thing about Avacyn is she has a very clear win condition, which is like just make it to the late game, cast like certain board wipes, and then like you're way out ahead than all of your opponents, and that's how you win.
I guess.
Like I think that's arguably like the thing with like all of these like top 10 mono white commanders is like they all, relatively speaking, have like a clear win condition. It's like that's kind of like one of the things I want to say. Like mono white really struggles to like have win conditions within the color. What do you think about that?
I do agree with that, but it also kind of gets to the point of, you know, when you get your commander out and your commander is kind of like what you build your deck around, that's the strategy. And so, okay, one of my opponents has their commander out, that becomes a threat, or that's something that, you know, I kind of want to get rid of because I know that that's going to slow down their deck. So you get rid of their commander. What does white have problem with? Getting out a lot of mana. So the taxing effect of commanders, where you have to pay 2 extra for every time you cast them, really becomes kind of hard for white, because it's like, in order to catch up, you need to like spend a couple turns just like getting the mana, which can be hard, not always, but like it's something that white struggles with. So unless if you have your commander out, your deck's not going to always run as best as it can, which is the problem that I see with Avacyn. Once I finally get Avacyn out, who is 8 mana, for like the 5th time I'm mentioning this episode, once she's gone, I have to spend 10 mana. Once she's gone a second time, I have to spend 12. And at that point, I'm not spending 14 mana to get her out again. And I just want to give up. So that's just, it's kind of a problem.
Yeah, I understand that. It's like, I don't know. Do you want to talk about like your ideas about the top 10 most played mono white cards in Commander?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, so I went on to EDH Rec to also kind of pull what what I was first using as like the top 10 white cards, but Jesse, our good friend, who's not with us today, wanted to also point out that these aren't like the top 10 best cards that you run in mono white. They're not just the top most played cards in mono white.
Mm-hmm.
So Swords to Plowshare, Path to Exile, Surprise to No One, top 2. You got Enlightened Tutor, Sun Titan, Return to Dust, Wrath of God, Ghostly Prison, Smothering Tithe, Austere Command, and then Oblivion Ring. So like I said, these are the most played, but I also think that there are cards on this list that didn't make it and would opt to be better inclusions, such
Like
as Oblivion Ring, which is a 3-mana enchantment that exiles something until Oblivion Ring leaves, but a much better slot for that would be Grasp of Fate, which is same cost, but does it to each of your opponents. The only reason why Grasp of Fate isn't on this list, though, is because it's only been printed once, and now its cost is, I don't know, $12, I think, as to where Oblivion Ring is less than $8. So I feel like the idea of some of these cards, or like Teferi's of Protection, that should definitely be a much better white card and played in a lot of mono white decks, but it's only been printed twice, and one of those was a Judge promo. So I feel like WotC isn't really thinking in the sense of like, what are the white cards that people need more access to in order to make white more viable in Commander, such as the 2 cards I just mentioned, Grasp of Fate, Teferi's Protection, or those are the first 2 that come to mind.
Yeah, that's very true. Where like, I mean, that's really true for a lot of players, where it's like budget's a really strict thing for a lot of players. Like, I think you and I arguably are like more invested players, where like we're willing to like put forth a lot of money to like buy these more expensive cards, arguably, and so we can like afford the Grasp of Fates and the like Teferi's Protections. But like a lot of players,
I actually don't have Grasp of Fate.
Yeah,
I should, and I think I might buy it here shortly, because I realize it's just such a much better. And I'm not going to take out Oblivion Ring, because Oblivion Ring's still a good card, but Grasp of Fate is definitely something where, you know, if all my opponents are playing with a green commander, or at least have green in their commander, they have access to ramp and can just get a couple turns ahead of the mana curve pace. I'm going to need a way to like kind of even the playing field all around. So Grasp of Fate is going to be able to do that for the same cost that Oblivion Ring does.
Yeah. It's like the best O-ring effect. It's like
CMC wise.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like, I have, like, quick side note, like, I have Sigarda deck, and like all the removal in that is like enchantment based, and Grasp of Fate is like the best O-ring effect ever. Like, I wish they printed more of those kinds of effects. That would be great and wonderful.
Or even just reprinted Grasp of Fate.
That too. Uh-huh. So,
and, I mean, I don't understand why they can't, but or won't. That's just maybe another question for another time. Like, why not? Like, I feel like that's something that you could have reprinted kind of often in a lot of mono white decks, because it's just a good card that mono white need, or white deck will need. So
yeah. So like,
maybe sigh.
Let me ask you this. So we've kind of been rambling for the last like 50 minutes. Like,
the last 48 minutes, the whole podcast.
Okay. Based on everything, like what do we think? Like, does white suck in EDH, or is it just not as bad as people tend to make it out to be?
I think it's not as bad as people make it out to be. And unfortunately, that is because of the reason that people aren't playing to its strengths, which are those mean effects that, other players are not going to be happy to be playing against. Armageddon, Grasp of Fate, Wrath of God, just because it slows them down and, has to play at the same speed, because people want to be able to, get things out, or they just don't like putting their stuff into the graveyard.
Okay. Yeah. I can understand that. I think for myself, how do I want to explain this? For me, I feel like what they did for red, they also need to do for white. So by that I mean, over the last couple of years, people have complained that red was the worst color. And so what did WotC do? They printed a bunch of rummaging effects. So you draw a card and discard some cards and
discard then draw. That's rummaging.
Yeah, rummaging effects. And so they added a bunch of those. So you're not necessarily creating a bunch of card advantage, but you're just churning through your deck so fast that you're hitting the key cards that you need to hit that it doesn't even matter. And then that combined with the fact that over the last couple of years, WotC has made some mono red commanders that are kind of like glass cannons. They kind of just shoot their wad and hopefully win early to mid game and win that way. So now there's a spectrum of late to mid to early mono red winning decks, and that's kind of what I want to have happen to mono white. Do you see what I mean? Where it's mono white's problem is I want them to create card draw effects within the color, the mono white color pie. So maybe more effects like Mentor the Meek and Dawn of Hope, where maybe you have to pay some more extra mana, but you get some relatively direct card draw instead of this group hug crap Happily Ever After. And then you're also combine that with commanders that synergize with white's positive card advantage aspects. The one and perfect example of this is Tashar, Ancestor's Apostle, which is what was it? It was number 7 on EDH Rex. It was 8 on EDH Rex top. So that deck can win as early as turn 4. My friend Park has been tuning it for the last year, and that deck consistently wins on turn 4.34 on average. He's goldfished it 200 times. And the problem is Tashar is the only mono white commander that can do that. And then there's tons of mono white commanders that can win late game or somewhat mid game, but there's not a lot of early game mono white commanders that can win. Does that make sense, Guy? Do you agree?
That does make sense, but I also think that part of the reason why Tashar, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, because maybe I don't know something, but I feel like part of the reason why Tashar can be so consistently good is because it doesn't necessarily rely on white effects, where it's pretty much artifacts. Am I wrong?
No, you're right, where it's artifacts, but in my eyes, it's all about artifact recursion. It's all about looping certain artifacts. It's around the recursion idea, which is all about mono white. Because if you look at a lot of mono white cards, they're a lot about recurring artifacts and equipment. So I feel this fits within the color pie idea of mono white.
Yes, okay. I agree with that. But But from what I know about the deck, it also just doesn't seem. I guess it's kind of like this. If you imagine a spectrum of power level, like a lot of the mono white kind of like fits into the like 4 to 6 kind of power level, where Tashar can be up in the like 9.5, and that's just like a huge gap where Tashar is able to do. It's really able to like take advantage of these card advantage or card recursion effects that make it so good, but it's just so much different from all these other ones where there's nothing that can really compare to it. So there needs to be more commanders like Tashar that are able to like capitalize. Yeah.
Like there's like if you look at all the other colors, I mean, maybe we haven't done the best job this episode because we haven't necessarily compared it against other colors, but like every other, if like you look at monocolored decks within the color buy, like mono green, there's like a clear spectrum from like 1 to 10 on power level. And like same with mono black and mono blue and even mono red. Throughout these last recent like 7-ish years, they've evened out that spectrum. With white, like Tashar is like the only one leading the front, and all the others are like in the middle and at the back end of the bus. It's like, all right, everybody, like stop being so afraid. Like let's move up to the front of the bus. Like stop being so scared. Let's start creating some like clever designs here.
Yeah, it's kind of like you see this a lot in like comedy movies where like people will be like, all right, who's gonna step up? And you see like a group of people
step back.
Like everyone steps back except one person, and then the one person is like, wait, what?
Yeah, that's
and Tashar is that one person.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Well, glad that we agreed on something for once. Fun little. All right, so moving forward, wrapping up the episode, fun little thought experiment that I kind of talked to you about that maybe we can just end the episode on. But do you think there is a card on the ban list at the moment, at the time of recording this, that could be taken off that could help out mono white, do you think? Or would you think to just keep everything that's on the ban list? Like, for instance, would you take off Caracas, Balance, Limited Resources? Do you think any of those would be good to then, like, maybe help out mono? Shahrazad, maybe? That was probably the worst example. But
that was like probably the worst example ever.
Yeah, thank you. Do you think there's maybe a card that could, like, I don't know, do that or help balance out white? Or do you think nah, not really?
Yeah, honestly, like, leave the ban list. That's fine. Like, I'm very much a person who's pro taking stuff off the ban list, but like the cards that are just mono white, you can probably leave them on. It's fine. I really do think the answer is like trying to encourage WotC to do what they did with red, where it's like they like are very smart in making some mono white commanders that, like Tashar, that are more high tier. Like, I don't know how to design those. I'm not that smart. I realize my limitations. But if we can just create something rather than taking something off, that's my answer.
Okay. Good. Pleasant Kenobi. I know how much you love him, but he brought up this thought experiment of, if we were to take off a card from, the ban list to help out mono white, what might that be? Because his first example is saying like Mox Pearl or whatever the Mox is for white, but that would be probably out of budget for a lot of people.
That's
not really.
Yeah, then you kind of get into the budget argument. It's one of those classic arguments where it's like so outside of people's budget, it's not even realistic. Don't even talk about it.
Right. I thought balance might be okay. I know that it's a pretty busted card to begin with, but at the moment, if I feel like you could maybe take it off the ban list for a short bit until mono white catches up, and then you could like, so it's almost like it has like a short time to like shine, but then like once we feel like without balance mono white could like hold itself, then we could re-ban balance, which would kind of be interesting if they like took a card off, unbanned it, then rebanned it like 6 months later. But
see, I suspect that like taking balance off the ban list, and we're kind of getting off on a tangent, would like help decks that are like multicolored that include white way more than helping mono white. You see what I'm saying?
yes and no, only because I think balance is a good example of very symmetrical effects where it still affects you and it is creating like a balance between all of the players on the board. Because like Caracas would be a bad example because it's only one legendary creature and you could just like kind of like hard focus one of your opponents. Limited resources would really like fuck up in the fact that like you can't then play more than a certain number of lands. So I feel like balance can, maybe you could recur it like once or twice depending on like how you build your deck. I think you'd have to build your deck around that a little, but like it would kind of be like a one time in the sense of like Armageddon where destroy all lands. But then this would also be something that like create the balance. If you know one of your opponents gets ahead really early, sorry, that is maybe a feel bad, but it's giving everyone a chance. So if there was one card, I would maybe say balance. And I'm also not saying this just because I bought balance to like own balance, but like balance might be the one mono white card that I would say can be taken off.
Okay, just like play. All I'll say is play it in your group. Try to break it as best you can. Let me know how it goes, and then we can talk about this later.
But in mono white, I feel like you're not going to be if.
Well, you can't just think about it in context of mono white. You gotta think about all of the colors.
Yes, that is true, and forgive my ignorance or whatever. But like, I guess maybe that is the problem. Is like. Do we make the clarification that balance can only be used in mono white, or does that just become too complicated? I don't know.
That becomes too complicated. I'm saying it now. No.
All right. Whatever.
Okay.
Let me be unhappy, I guess.
No, I'm not gonna let you stew in your own misery. Come on. We'll end this episode now. Thank you all for all of you crazy people who bothered to listen this far to two drunk people rambling. You can find us on YouTube, on Spotify, on Twitter. We're like, stay tuned to hear about our thoughts on Brawl and my experience at Command Fest Seattle. Why don't you?
Tune in in the next 2 weeks to listen to us rant about Brawl. I feel like this is one of the first episodes in quite a while where I've been pretty drunk during the episode. Like,
good.
I feel like I built up somewhat of an not intolerance, somewhat of a tolerance for alcohol, or at least beer, while we talk. Where, as we've rambled, I don't feel it as much. But now, after drinking almost a full bottle of wine, I feel like, I don't know, I'm gonna listen to this and be like, what the fuck was I saying in like half of this episode?
Welcome to me every episode.
Yeah, I wanted this to be like a pretty impactful episode because I was like, yeah, so many people are talking about this. But now I'm just making like a drunk fool of myself and I'm like, God, what the fuck? Yeah, all right. Thank you very much for listening. We hope you have a great night and we'll see you again soon. Peace.